Welcome to PayPod, the show that features thought-provoking interviews with leaders and entrepreneurs in the payments and financial technology industries. From credit card processing to Bitcoin, we cover it all. So if you want to know what's happening right now in the payments industry, stay tuned. Now, here's your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Scott back here with a new episode of PayPod, the Payments Industry Podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about independent sales organizations, or ISOs. And helping me to explore this is Mark Dunn, who is the founder of Field Guide Enterprises LLC, a company that offers consulting services for ISOs, and is also the co-founder of the Midwest Acquirers Association, Inc., which hosts an annual conference for ISOs and acquirers. So needless to say, Mark has a ton of knowledge and experience about this. Mark, welcome to the show.
Scott, thank you for having me.
Right on. Well, to start us off, Mark, can you tell us just a little bit about your career and how you ended up at consulting to help ISOs form and grow?
Sure. I started into the industry in 1989, and I came in on the processor telecommunications side of the business. And then I moved over to the hardware side, meaning terminals. And from there, I got more experience in the processing side of the business, meaning a third-party processor. And from that point, it was roughly about 20 years ago that I moved into the ISO side of the business, became national sales manager of an ISO, and then worked from there into a position as an independent consultant, which I've been doing for the last 14 years.
Wow. So obviously a lot of experience there. That's so interesting how, just over time, kind of wearing different hats and working in ISOs. That's awesome. Today we want to talk about the current business of being an ISO. But, before we go further, for a listener that is new to payments, can you describe what an ISO is and how they fit into the payments landscape?
Sure, I'd be happy to. ISO is an acronym that stands for Independent Sales Organization. And that's the term that's commonly used in the Visa world. In MasterCard, they call that an MSP, or Merchant Services Provider. And whether you're an ISO or an MSP, you are a registered reseller of bank processing services for merchants. And just to elaborate a little further on that, an ISO sells a bank processing program. So they're actually selling on behalf of what we call a sponsor bank. And the sponsor bank has the relationship into Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover. There's also a third-party processing typically. The ISO sells the program to the merchant, and the paperwork is signed, and it's actually an agreement between the merchant and the bank. And the processor is doing the number crunching and authorizations in the background.
And at a high level, what does the process for becoming an ISO look like today, and what types of things do you help advise on in that process?
Well, becoming an ISO is a lot more complex than most people think it is, because let me tell you the typical pattern that I see.
Sure.
A group of partners comes together, and usually some of them have some merchant services sales experience, that is bank card processing sales experience. And there may be a technical IT person, there may be another partner that has a marketing background or background in a specific industry that this ISO is going to be calling on. But typically it's a group of people that are forming this organization. Now, they have to sign an ISO agreement with a third-party processor, or they become a sub of a larger ISO. And that agreement has a lot of really critical information in it. Typically, the two parts that we're looking at are the terms and conditions under which that ISO will operate with their partners, meaning the sponsor bank and the processor. And it also has what we normally call the Schedule A, which is the pricing that they will receive, that they'll be paying for the processing. And if I could just add one more note.
For sure.
There are many, many different criteria that this partnership or these group of people should evaluate when they're looking at a potential sponsor bank or processor. I came up with a list that I was just looking at the other day, and it has over 105 criteria on which to compare one potential partner with another. So you got to dig into the details of that agreement, and you have to understand how the business works and how you're going to make money and how that pricing compares with other pricing that's available in the market. So you're going to need somebody to help you dig through all of that, somebody who's been down that path many times before.
For sure. Now, with businesses like Stripe and Square that have really upended the industry, the margins for ISOs on traditional credit card processing have just really shrunk. How can ISOs remain competitive and successful in the face of this technology-driven competition?
Well, technology is amazing all of us now in the things that these small startup companies are able to do. But there are still some basic rules that apply in providing business services. And that's really what merchant services processing is all about. It's a business service. So the number one thing is reliability. You have to base the business on good technical processes that are up just about 100% of the time. I think the industry standard now is 99.998% of the time that these services have to be available. The second thing is there has to be excellent responsiveness and customer service when things aren't working right. The third thing is there has to be the willingness on the part of your partners to support you. So not just helping the merchant out with their questions, but helping the ISO understand the processes and the potential problems and issues that can arise. So I call it a value chain. So it's the sponsor bank, it's the third-party processor, it's the ISO, and the merchant all working together to make sure that there's a dialogue, to make sure that the processing continues. Frankly, the service works so well in most cases that merchants only think about it when it's broken. So they'll place a phone call, and in my experience, phone calls fall into two types. The first type is, my process isn't working, I can't close my batch, for example. The second is, I just got my statement and I've got a question. Why did I pay $400 last month for processing, and this month my bill is $680? Why is that? Help me understand. So two types of questions typically. My process is broken and I have a question about my bill.
So if ISOs can handle that and do a great job answering those questions and delivering those services, they're going to be competitive with maybe some of those other businesses like Stripe that maybe won't be able to do that, right?
So to my way of looking at it, merchants would rather deal with somebody local who's capable, somebody who's known in the community. They do get recommendations from other business people, of course, but they'd like to deal with, for example, if they're located in Cleveland, they'd like to deal with a Cleveland-based processor or ISO, or somebody who's within their geography. The same goes for whether it's Orange County, California, or it's Orlando, Florida. If there's a rap against these larger companies, it's that they don't provide the touchy-feely, warm response, here's your answer right away kind of thing. For example, it's really tough to get Square on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
They'll push an answer down the pipe via email or chat or something like that. But if you're a person who likes personal contact, Square's probably not the company for you.
Absolutely. I'm curious, what are some of the innovations or unique approaches you've seen from ISOs that you think we'll be seeing more of in the future?
Well, one thing I'm seeing a lot of today is that specialized companies within vertical industries, they've been referring the processing piece of this off to an ISO and taking 15 to 20% residual split for recommending their accounts, okay? And what I'm seeing is that many of those companies are now realizing that this is a second income stream that they could be getting money from, and that forming their own ISO and capturing 100% of that residual is a possibility, provided that they're ready to make the commitment to that business. You can't go halfway. You have to go all the way if you're going to do that. But the rewards are significant. I'm working with several people right now who are squarely in that category. They didn't know a lot about merchant services processing, but they're forming their own ISO. They're going to be doing all of the processing themselves, and they're going to be increasing their take-home about 400% as a result.
So it's possible to have your cake and eat it too. You just got to put the work in, right?
Yes, you have to. you got to do your homework, and you got to have help.
Yeah.
Everybody needs help.
Absolutely. So what's the biggest mistake you've seen a young ISO make, and how can they avoid making that?
You know, a lot of people who've been in the merchant services industry, they hear this talk about owning your own bin, doing your own underwriting, and becoming the master of your own fate. And they say, that's what I want to do. So they want to run out and become a wholesale ISO right away. And my recommendation is do not do that. You have to have time and experience and seasoning and a good, solid business base as a retail ISO before you get into the wholesale world. To just clarify what that means, a retail ISO is an ISO that does not take risk. Their underwriting is actually being done by somebody else, and they're submitting their accounts to that entity to be underwritten or to be checked to make sure that the account is real, that it's a legitimate business, that they're actually selling what they say they're selling, and to go through all of those tests. A wholesale ISO is one that is taking the risk, doing their own underwriting. They have talented specialty people on board who are examining these accounts. And that step from retail to wholesale is a very big step. And that's probably the biggest mistake that I've seen some small ISOs do, is they don't reckon with how much it's going to cost and how much risk they're going to take on when they do that.
In a sense, bite off more than they can chew.
Yes. And the latest biting off more than you can chew is now many small ISOs instantly want to become a payment facilitator or PayFac. And that's an even bigger step than a wholesale ISO. You have to understand what's involved in that step. You have to know all of the requirements. You have to know the technology that you're going to need to implement. You have to know the timeline, and you have to have a guide to get you through that process.
Absolutely. So you may have answered this, but I'm curious if there's maybe some other advice you might have. If you had to give, maybe one best piece of advice to someone who is thinking of starting an ISO in 2018, what might that advice be?
Well, think of it this way. Unfortunately, as in many business opportunities, you don't know what you don't know. You'd better go out and hire somebody who's been there, who's helped some successful ISOs get started, and has done a good job in the past. Think of it this way. If you'd never been to Europe before and you'd heard all about the City of Lights, if you were going to go to Paris, you could certainly get a guidebook and you could read up how to get there and wander around. But take the approach that let's hire a local expert to show us the behind the scenes, how everything works. And it's even more important in a business sense because you want to know, how does this business make money? What are the insider's knowledge that you have to really plan out this business and be successful? And in the ISO business, there are two paydays. There's the payday that you get from your residual check month to month, and then there's the payday that you get when you sell the business to someone else. Because if you're successful, another business is going to come along and say, wow, that looks like they're really killing it. Let's talk to them because we may want to acquire them. So if you're thinking your business is going to be acquired someday, and you better be thinking about an exit strategy as you're starting your business, then you want to set it up so that it's easier to realize that big paycheck. And some of those paychecks can be pretty sizable. If you don't get that kind of help up front, you may make some key mistakes that really lower the value of your portfolio later.
Absolutely. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, you are part of the leadership team behind the conference called the Midwest Acquirers Conference, MWAA. What is the conference all about?
Well, the conference is a networking opportunity. It's an opportunity to meet people in the industry, to form relationships, and it's also an opportunity to get up to speed on current events, current developments in the electronic payments industry. First of all, we're a regional show, and we have people from all over the country, and sometimes even all over the world, come to the Midwest and talk to us about the merchant services business. It's an opportunity to find out if that ISO program that you've been thinking about is who they say they are. You can meet the people. Usually the principals of many of these ISOs come and talk to agents. There's a great networking opportunity in an exhibit hall. And what's most amazing for most small ISOs is how valuable it is to them at a very low cost. I mean, for under a couple of $100, you can get in the door. You've got great networking, great opportunity to talk to the right people, food, an opportunity to have a drink or two, socialize and just get to know many people in the industry. We get about 750 people attending our show every year, and we think that this year is going to be even bigger. And we're July 25th and 26th in Chicago, Illinois. And if I could throw in one little plug, it's www.midwestacquirers.com.
Now, I'm curious, you were mentioning all the benefits of going to the conference. Is there anything that ISOs interested in taking their business to the next level can learn by attending the MWAA conference?
Yeah, it just so happens that I have been doing a seminar called the Field Guide Seminar at the MWAA conference for the last 15 years. And this year we have some great presentations on the subject of professionalizing your ISO. That is, how to run it like a real pro, how to focus in on those things that will allow you to really impress potential partners, potential buyers, people who are in the industry. We're also going to be doing a review of several topics related to cash discount, which is a really hot topic lately, and I think is going to change the industry. And there's several other presentations that we have that I think are going to be really exciting. One of them is focused in on what keeps merchants up at night and how can we as ISOs address those needs.
See, that's really smart because that kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is just the service and the thing that can really set you apart with merchants. So kind of thinking about it from the merchant's perspective, I mean, that seems like that's a brilliant way to go about it for sure. So my last question here is actually a group of questions because we have a segment that we like to end with where we do a fast 5 questions, rapid fire. So to start us off, make a prediction about the future of payments. And you might have just mentioned that, but make a prediction about the future of payments that you expect will happen, in the maybe next 12 to 24 months or maybe a little beyond.
Yeah. Personally, I believe cash discount is going to make a big change in electronic payments in the next 12 to 24 months. Now, not all of the rules and all of the considerations have been clarified yet, I think, by the card associations, but I'm seeing intense interest right now from ISOs because it really reestablishes the ability to get margins that we were looking at 10 years ago.
Sure, absolutely. So what's one cool piece of payment-related technology that you've come across recently that's maybe unrelated to your specific business that impressed you?
Well, I'm seeing incredibly powerful tablet and iPhone-based management systems today. It's just amazing now what they're able to do in terms of driving information, driving a dashboard to the business owner so that they can be aware of what's going on at their business 24/7. I'm really just impressed with what these systems are able to do now.
For sure. In the next 5 years, most Americans will make a purchase with either Bitcoin, Apple Pay, or some other thing. Which one and why?
I think Apple Pay and iPhone-based payments are gonna lead the way. Personally, I think Bitcoin has so much volatility baked into it.
Yeah, it's hard to deal with that.
I've heard that there are as many as 1,500 cryptocurrencies right now out in the marketplace. I think that's the Wild West, and I think a lot of consumers are very conservative about that stuff. I don't think a lot of people are going to be into that unless they think they can get a killing. Unfortunately, we all know that making a killing is what also makes people very, very poor and unhappy because they don't make the killing, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, just on the side of Bitcoin, I know there's a company called Steam that sells video games and things online. They had to stop accepting Bitcoin because they were getting killed by the volatility of it. And just, one transaction, the value of Bitcoin would vary so much. It's like we can't even
Yeah.
We can't even stay ahead of this to process and give you the darn game you want.
People are kind of funny when it comes to their funds, their banking, and so forth. And, why do people still use cards? Well, part of it's force of habit, but part of it is they know it's relatively safe. They know that they're protected by the bank in case somebody steals the card and starts making purchases. And they have kind of an inherent distrust in some of these other payment platforms.
Absolutely.
That acts as a drag on the technology, I think.
Mm-hmm. What's one piece of advice you might have for someone who is considering the payments industry as a career?
Well, I believe that payments is a wonderful career. It's changing all the time, but there are certain elements that keep it stable and solid. And certainly there's many, many acquisitions going on, so the landscape is changing constantly. But I believe that somebody who's creative and knows what value is and knows how to sell it, knows how to market it, payments is a fantastic career where the confluence of money and technology come together. There's always going to be that white hot center where there's a lot of ferment, a lot of good business going on, and things are going to be disrupted constantly, but in a much slower manner than I think what you would see in many of the industries. I don't think it's going to eliminate jobs. I think it's going to create so many new jobs that there will be great opportunities even for people to be retrained, because if you get technology and you're trainable, you're always going to have a job in payments, I believe. I think it's a wonderful career. I've spent almost 30 years in it, and I love it. I love what I do.
Yeah, I'd trust advice on that from someone like yourself who has made such a career of it.
Thanks.
Last question. What's the best business advice you've ever received, and from whom?
Well, I have an uncle who is a very talented businessman. It's interesting. He started off as a pastor, as a minister. He evolved into a guy who ran an investment foundation that built churches. And he said something to me one time that really hit home. He said, look, I don't ask anything more than a full dollar value for every dollar I spend. I just want to make sure that I'm getting full value. And that's really stuck with me. You don't have to provide miracles, but you better get full value, deliver full value for the money that they're giving you. And it's our responsibility as business people to take that on, take that challenge on, and make sure that we're delivering more and more value for the money that's being spent with us.
100%. I think that's awesome advice. I'm going to take that to heart because that's good stuff. Mark, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This was really, really interesting stuff. And again, it's the MWAA conference. Yes, the Midwest Acquirers Conference, right?
That's right. That's right. Coming up July 25th and 26th in Chicago, Illinois.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mark. This was awesome.
Thank you, Scott. Great to be with you today.
So that's it for our interview today, which means that it is time to award our Small Business Organization of the Week. Each and every episode, we want to highlight business groups and organizations doing great work advancing the interests of entrepreneurs and small businesses, helping business people connect, being positive influences in their local communities, and more. These organizations are nominated by you, our listeners. So if you ever think of one you think deserves to be highlighted, don't hesitate to let us know. Send an email to scott@soarpay.com and we may just mention it. Our award winner this week is the Small Business Council of Rochester. Located in Rochester, New York, they deliver premier services, event, and educational programs to energize business success in the greater Rochester area. Their mission is to foster a caring community that celebrates small business by delivering premier programs and events that promote business growth in the entire area of Rochester. They accomplish this with a 5-pronged approach, or you might even call it a 5C approach. Caring, practicing year-round community outreach and benevolence. Connecting, holding high-impact networking events. Coaching, providing access to member organizations who offer services and counsel to small businesses. Celebrating, recognizing local small businesses and successful business leaders. And finally, community, creating an intimate culture for networking and connecting small businesses. You can find out more about them by connecting online at rochestersbc.com There you can see the programs they put together, sign up to join, reach out directly for more information, and of course, browse their events calendar. If you're looking for an organization that is fully committed to supporting small businesses, specifically locally, look no further than SBC of Rochester. Huge congrats to them on their selection. So that completes our show today. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe if you like the show. You can do so on iTunes, Google Play, and many other platforms. So until next time, I'll see you then, and thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to another episode of PayPod, brought to you by Soar Payments. Soar Payments is a leading merchant services provider for e-commerce, high-risk, and hard-to-place businesses. If you'd like to get the latest PayPod episode sent to you automatically, subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher, or visit soarpay.com/podcast.